Roommate from hell. I had just gotten a job offer and moved to Las Vegas for work. I rented an Airbnb while I looked for a permanent place to stay. The rents were expensive, so I had to resort to renting a room. I went online and started looking for rooms for rent on the marketplace. I messaged a few people and started to search for places. Eventually, I found one that I really liked and decided to move in. The house was old and owned by a woman named Mary. She was polite but never spoke a word. She was always communicating through handwritten notes, which I found very strange, but I didn't care. The room was priced right and it was near my job site. Needless to say, that was a big mistake later on. Mary had some very strange habits. She would often leave the house at the same time every day, around 9:15 p.m. She'd leave every day like clockwork. I chalked it up to her maybe having a job and needing to beat traffic, but it was very strange. Anyways, curiosity got the best of me and I decided to follow her to see where she went. So, one day after she left, I decided to follow her. She got into her car and drove off, and I started to follow her. We lived close to the edge of the desert, right by South Point Casino. She got on the highway and started driving. A few miles down the road, she turned into an abandoned building on the side of the road. I started to get kind of scared. What was she doing in there? Why did she go to that building late at night? Anyways, I parked a bit far away and had binoculars in the car. I started to scan the area, and what I saw was somewhat shocking. I saw her. She met with a few other people and she put on some kind of cape, one of the ones they wear in cults. Then she went around the building. I moved to get a better angle, and I did. I saw them draw something on the floor. I couldn't exactly see what it was, but I believe it was a pentagram. They then lit a fire inside of it. Then it hit me. Mary was the leader of the cult. They then brought a bag, a big black one, and there was some liquid dripping out of it. Damn. Did I just witness a cult in the desert? What's in the bag? What I saw was basically described as my worst nightmare. It was human parts. There was a head, a torso, some arms. A guy brought a knife and made big cuts in the arms, tossing them around like a maniac. Then they organized the human parts around the pentagram. This was some nightmarish shit, honestly. Then the unthinkable happened. A car was speeding nearby and eventually crashed into the building where they were doing the sacrificial ritual or whatever that was. I pulled out my phone to record what happened. The cult people walked up to the car and pulled the half-conscious person from it. They took him. I don't think anyone saw the crash or heard it. They then pulled the guy from the car and took him inside the building. Some guys were cheering like crazy. I knew something horrible was about to happen. I had to get a better angle, so I moved. I couldn't exactly see what was happening inside, but I knew it wasn't good. Then I heard some loud noises like something metal. Eventually, I saw a guy coming out with a big black bag. Yep, you guessed it. They had cut that poor man up and put him in the bag. I felt sick. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My heart was pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to do, but then I realized something. Mary was the one leading this. The woman I thought I knew, the one I lived with, was part of all this. She was the one who had been doing these horrible things. I couldn't stay. I had to get out. I turned around quickly and ran back to my car. My hands were shaking as I got in. I drove as fast as I could, not looking back. But even as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. I kept thinking about that bag, the body parts, and the fire. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but I knew I couldn't go back there. I just wanted to forget what I saw. But deep down, I knew that whatever I had witnessed wasn't over. It was just the beginning. As I drove, my hands still shaking, I tried to focus on the road, but my mind kept racing. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. Mary, the cult, the body parts. It was like something out of a nightmare. I glanced in my rearview mirror, my heart skipping a beat when I saw headlights in the distance. The car was far behind, but it was moving fast, almost as if it was following me. I told myself it was just my imagination, but the longer I drove, the closer the car seemed to get. I took a turn down a side road trying to lose them. But when I looked back, the car was still there, right behind me. My breath quickened and panic began to set in. Who was it? Why were they following me? I pushed my foot down harder on the gas, then I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. I glanced at it. Unknown number flashed on the screen. I hesitated for a moment but answered, my voice shaking. "Hello? I know it was you. You really shouldn't have followed me." I slammed on the brakes, nearly losing control of the car. Then I crashed into some building. Suddenly I heard a noise, something scraping against my window. I turned to see a shadowy figure, pale, with eyes that gleamed in the moonlight. It was her. Mary was standing right outside my car, smiling, her face twisted and wrong. Before I could scream, the world around me went black. I didn't feel anything. You are now one of us. The roommate that never sleeps. I had just moved into a new apartment, eager to start fresh in the city. My roommate seemed like a perfect fit, friendly, easygoing, and quick to show me around. Everything seemed normal at first, but there was one thing that felt off. He had a strange sleep schedule. He never slept at night, only during the day. "I'm just a night owl," he'd explain. "I work late, so it works better for me." I didn't think much of it at first. Everyone has their quirks, Dot. We also live in Vegas, so a lot of people have that schedule for working at the casinos. But as the days went on, I started to notice things that made me uneasy. He would stay up late, pacing the apartment as if he were sleepwalking, his eyes glassy and distant. He never seemed to eat, at least I never saw him eating. He'd drink coffee in the morning, but that was it. His room was always dark, the blinds drawn tight even in the middle of the day. One night I was lying in bed trying to sleep when I heard him talking in his sleep. It wasn't the usual mumbling, but frantic whispers. "She's coming for me," he muttered, his voice tight with fear. "Not again. Not again." I froze, a chill creeping up my spine. I tried to ignore it. Maybe he was just stressed, but something didn't feel right. The next evening I decided to confront him. I knocked on his door, but there was no answer. I cracked it open and peeked inside. He was standing in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at himself, completely still. His face was pale, his eyes wide open, unblinking. I called out to him, but he didn't react. He just stood there, motionless. It felt like an eternity. "Hey?" I asked, my voice shaking. Suddenly he blinked, snapping out of his trance. He turned to me, offering a smile as if nothing had happened. "Oh hey, I'm just tired, you know? Long night. I'll get some rest soon," he said. But there was something in his eyes, something that didn't sit right. I tried to shake off the unease, but it only grew stronger. His strange behavior continued. At night he would wander the apartment, moving silently like a sleepwalker. I'd hear him mumbling in his sleep over and over. "She's here. She's coming." One night I woke up to the sound of movement beside my bed. My heart dropped as I opened my eyes. He was standing right next to me, his eyes wide open but lifeless, his skin pale and clammy. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak, I just froze in terror. "She's here," he whispered, his voice hollow. "You need to leave, now." My stomach twisted. I scrambled to get out of bed, trying to push past him, but he didn't move. His presence felt suffocating. I glanced around in panic. The apartment was different now. The walls felt closer, tighter, as if the space was shrinking. Shadows shifted in the corners, creeping and writhing. "No, this can't be happening," I muttered, trying to breathe, but the air felt heavy, thick. He didn't say anything else. He just stood there, unblinking, staring at me as if he were frozen in place. I knew I had to get out. I bolted for the door, but when I stepped into the hallway, it was darker than it should have been. The air was thick, the pressure unbearable. I ran, not stopping until I was outside, far from the apartment, gasping for breath, my mind struggling to process everything I had just seen. I glanced back at the building, my heart pounding. From the window, I saw him standing there, staring out at me. His face was still, but his eyes were gone. Empty sockets where his eyes should have been. A haunting, unnatural smile stretched across his face. I turned away, unable to look back any longer. I got myself a hotel for the night, then I came back, packed my stuff, and moved out. F this. I didn't feel like dealing with a crazy roommate right now. The friend from Craigslist. I had been searching for a place to live for weeks, and when I saw the Craigslist ad for a cheap room, I jumped at the opportunity. The house was quiet, nestled in a calm neighborhood, and the rent was more than reasonable. The landlord, a seemingly friendly guy, welcomed me with a warm smile and showed me the room. Everything seemed perfect, too perfect. At first, the house was exactly what I had been looking for: peaceful, comfortable, with no loud noises or unwanted surprises. But as the days went on, I started noticing small, odd things. It began with the clothes in the closet. They weren't mine. A few shirts, a jacket, all neatly folded, but definitely not mine. I figured it was a mix-up, maybe something left behind by the last tenant. I didn't think much of it. But as time went on, the weirdness started to add up. One evening, while going through a drawer in the living room, I found an old letter, yellowed and worn. It was addressed to the landlord, but the name on the return address was different. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was probably just some random piece of mail. Then I found the photographs. Old photos of the landlord with different people, each one marked with a word in red ink. Missing. A chill ran down my spine. There were no signs of these people around the house, no mention of them when I asked. The landlord simply shrugged as if nothing was out of the ordinary. Old friends, he'd say with a smile, but it didn't sit right. The more I looked, the more disturbing things I uncovered. I found a guest book in the hallway with notes from previous tenants. At first, they were just typical messages. Thanks for the place. Great living here. But as I read further, the notes became increasingly unsettling. The last few were filled with warning after warning. Don't trust him. Get out while you can. And one that sent a chill down my spine. He won't let you leave. The landlord started acting differently too. He became more distant, possessive even. He'd make strange comments like how much he hated it when new roommates left, as though it was personal. I started feeling uncomfortable, like a guest who had overstayed his welcome. The house, once comforting, now felt suffocating. One night I decided I'd had enough. I couldn't stay in that house any longer. I packed my bags and made my way to the front door, only to find it locked from the inside. Panic set in as I tried to turn the handle, but the door wouldn't budge. I called out for the landlord, but the house was eerily silent. The landlord appeared in the hallway, a smile plastered on his face, but there was something in his eyes that I didn't recognize, something cold. "You're not leaving," the landlord said quietly, stepping closer. I backed away, my heart racing. "What do you mean? Let me out." The landlord's smile twisted into something darker. "I can't let you go. You're just like the others. You'll be staying with me now." My breath hitched as my eyes fell on the wall behind the landlord. There, hanging among the other photos, was a new one, a photo of the landlord, but this time my face was beside him. The picture had a red X drawn across my face. My scream echoed through the house as I ran toward the door, but no one answered. I screamed for help, but the house swallowed my voice, leaving me trapped. The house was silent once more, as though it had always been. I realized then that I was just another missing face, another name to be crossed off the list of the landlord's strange, twisted collection, and no one would ever find me.